Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Film for Fans podcast, the podcast from movie fans for movie fans. I am your host, Ryan Dunlevy, joined by my co-host, Rob Dunham.
Hey, everybody.
Well, we have an excellent show for you. We are going to talk about the box office. We will talk about Rob's 100% accurate prediction from this weekend. We have a big list of movies opening in theaters. We'll take a deeper look at some of the updates with regard to DC Studios. And we will discuss little appreciated aspects of movies, things that you may miss if you're not paying attention to them when you're watching a movie. And of course, our watch list. All right, Rob, you ready to get started?
I am.
Box office is dominated by The Rock. Yes, that
Not
is
that
right. Yeah. Not that. Black Adam takes number one at the box office with 67 million. Dwayne Johnson, of course, starring in this DC feature. Last week, if you listened to last week's podcast, which you totally should have, Rob gave a prediction as to what Black Adam would make. And he predicted between 65 and 70 million. It made 67 million. Rob wins.
It's between 65 and 70.
Yeah, which is pretty much right dead on. So Black Adam takes number one in the box office. Ticket to Paradise, the romantic comedy with George Clooney and Julia Roberts, came in second at 16.5 million in its first week in the box office. Number third is Smile at 8.5 million. Halloween Ends at 8 million. That one has crossed the $50 million barrier. And Lyle Crocodile rounds out the top five at 4.3 million. Rob, what do you make of the box office results?
So the thing that's most impressive to me is not Black Adam. It's the fact that Smile, if you look at the worldwide box office, it has a budget of $17 million and it is $170 million.
Yes.
Worldwide.
And that includes almost 85 million domestic.
Yeah. Which is even just the 85 million domestic would be an insane 4 times the budget of the movie.
Yeah.
But the fact that it's literally made 10 times this budget when you count overseas. I mean, usually you expect horror movies to do pretty good, but this one has exceeded even that.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's done really, really well. Obviously the viral marketing campaign brought it some attention domestically, but that would not have really affected the international box office. I have no idea what kind of marketing they did internationally, but they certainly did some interesting stuff domestically. But whatever they're doing, it worked. And yeah, I don't think you haven't seen this one either, right?
I've not seen it yet, no.
Okay. Yeah, so I'm not sure how much this has to do with the quality of the movie itself versus just it's Halloween and people want to go see a horror movie and that's the one they chose. But either way, it's done really, really well. I am somewhat impressed with Lyle Crocodile, a movie I literally know nothing about. I know it's for kids, but I haven't seen a single advertisement for it, and it's been in the top 5 for 3 straight weeks. So hey, that's something.
My favorite part was when he asked the crocodile how much he ever lost in the coin flip. Oh wait, that was a different movie.
It's an entirely different movie. Yes. And also, I think the Ticket to Paradise is pretty much exactly where I would have expected it, which is a pretty solid take for a romantic comedy, especially starring 2 well-known, but getting up there actors. So that one definitely has an older audience appeal to it, but it did pretty well. And so I think they were probably pleased with the results there. Any other comments on the box office for the past weekend?
I mean, Black Adam, I think is fairly impressive. And given the news that we just got about DC that we'll talk about a bit later in the podcast, there's some good vibes, seems like, around DC right now, which we've not been able to say for quite a while.
Yeah. I mean, it's not a slam dunk, but I mean, it's a solid result, and DC needs some solid results. And obviously, there was enough of a market to go see it, so we'll see. Yeah. Now, we'll move on to what's coming out this weekend. And there's one that I don't have on the list that I know you wanted to talk about, and I do too. So we can mention that and bring that up too. But we'll start out with the what's in the box office. And we have 4 movies of note coming out. One is Pray for the Devil, Prey, as if you didn't guess that based on that title. The second one is Call Jane. Third one is Till, and the last one is Tar. So Pray for the Devil is a nun prepares to perform an exorcism and comes face to face with a demonic force with mysterious ties to her past. And this is Jacqueline Byers, Virginia Madsen, Colin Salmon star in this one. It's another horror movie entrance. And next we have Call Jane. And this stars Elizabeth Banks and Sigourney Weaver, Chris Messina. And it's a married woman with an unwanted pregnancy lives in a time in America where she can't get a legal abortion, and works with a group of suburban women to find help. Next we have the movie Till. And this stars Danielle Deadweiler, Jalen Hall, Frankie Faison, Haley Bennett. And in 1955, after Emmett Till is murdered in a brutal lynching, his mother vows to expose the racism behind the attack while working to have those involved brought to justice. And the last movie on the list for the box office is Tar. And I'm not sure if that's pronounced a slightly different way. There's an accent over the A there, but I'm telling it as Tar. Cate Blanchett, Naomi Merlant, Nina Haas. And this is set in the international world of Western classical music. The film centers on Lydia Tarr, widely considered one of the greatest living composer-conductors and the first ever female music director of a major German orchestra. So you can get a lot of classical music in this one. So Rob, you have 4 potential entrants into the box office. Pick your film fare.
So if I would choose to go to one, which I'm not sure I will, I think the movie about Emmett Till is the most interesting to me because I've read a lot about that story previously in books and magazines, and obviously studied it in history class when I was at school. Very powerful moment. They just unveiled a statue of him in the town where he was lynched. So it's a very appropriate movie time wise to be coming out, and obviously with everything going on in our world, it seems like that's always going to be appropriate, unfortunately, because people are dumb. But hopefully it's helpful for some people to see what happened there. I mean, Pray for the Devil also intrigues me. The trailers made it look quite creepy. I think anytime probably the movies I'm most creeped out by, if you want to say that, are like spiritual, supernatural kind of movies. So this would definitely fall into that category. Along the lines of like The Exorcist, maybe The Exorcism of Emily Rose, which is probably my favorite in that kind of subgenre of horror. So there are a couple I'm interested in. The one I'm most interested in is actually not in the box office.
Yes, which we will get to in a moment.
Yes.
For me, it would probably be Tar. I do like classical music. Now I have no idea who this person is, this director. So if it's just like, hey, it's a life story about her, whatever, But if it includes, which I'm assuming it would, a significant amount of classical music involved, then I might find that interesting. I'll be honest and say that I go back and forth on movies like Till. I do think it's very important to understand the history and to um for those stories to be told for sure. I do think sometimes there is there is a function of over dwelling on on the past on some of this stuff to the detriment of the present. I do think that's possible. Now, I'm not saying that this movie is responsible for that or as anything. It's just a general thought on that. That I do think sometimes we dwell so much on that that we can forget the progress we've made, even though it's not perfect on
Mm-hmm.
those areas. So I go back and forth on that, but it certainly is. It certainly is a key historical moment that deserves its mention and deserves to be told. So I have no problem with it from that standpoint. Um, Now let's get on to the one that we probably both are most interested in. Rob, go ahead and take the lead on this one.
So, All Quiet on the Western Front is a Netflix release. Um, there are two other versions of this movie. One came out in uh, the 1930s, I want to say.
I'll look it up.
It's very old, and it's actually my favorite version of the movie, believe it or not. Um,
1930,
okay,
exactly.
and
1930.
and then the second one. Do you have the date there for that one?
I have a TV movie from 1979.
Yep, yep.
Yep.
So those are the two versions of the movie that came out. Obviously, the 1931 is black and white,
Mm-hmm.
unsurprisingly.
Mm-hmm.
Um, there is I'm very intrigued by seeing an updated version of this because um, the reason why I like the 1931 so much, and um, the reason why I have given I would say it's a movie that has actually made me pay attention to older movies,
Mm-hmm.
and to give some more of them a chance because it's such a good story.
Yeah.
um, a moving, emotional, realistic story about kids basically being thrown into the front lines of this war,
Mm-hmm.
uh, having no idea what they're getting into
Yeah.
at all, and just seeing it's brutal, emotionally. I wouldn't say it's brutal like it's not gory in
Mm-hmm.
that, but it's definitely a very emotionally weighty story, and so I'm interested in seeing another take on that, a
Yeah.
little more modernized, updated visually.
Yeah. Yeah. It will be really interesting. Did you read the book?
I did. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a regular in the school curriculum, or at least it used to be. I remember reading it. I spent like an entire day reading it because it was due the next, like it was due on a Monday, and I hadn't done any of it. So I spent like literally all day Saturday reading this book. But it's interesting enough. It came out in 1929, and then they made a movie about it in 1930. So there was a real quick turnaround on this. It obviously took off right away. Um, but yeah, it's a really powerful story about World War One, and it really does give you a sense of what World War One was like from a literary perspective. Something I think 1917 did a fantastic job of in the cinematic realm in ways that we hadn't seen before. So it is interesting to see what Netflix is going to do with this particular story. Um, it's a little bit the story itself is down to earth and really human. Like you really relate to the characters. You feel what they're going through. So it will be interesting to see if that translates into uh, the Netflix version.
One one
Yeah.
one thing I always loved about the story too is if you think about it, it's really like a time capsule kind of movie
Mhm.
because it's after the First World War, which
Yeah.
at that point they had thought was the war to end all wars. It's
Yeah.
before World War II. So the story itself is set in a very interesting time when they
Hmm.
didn't it's going to happen in a decade
Yeah. And
from.
World War II has really overshadowed World War One. It garners so much more attention than what we pay to World War Two or World War One. And yeah, it's the World War One is, if you know anything about the history of World War One, it really is just unbelievable in terms of how everything went down. And the old saying that the next war is always fought with the tactics that won the previous war, not adjusting for technology. World War One is the number one example of that. It really is. It's yeah, it was a devastating war.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, really looking forward to All Quiet on the Western Front. And that is out today, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So as you listen to this, it is out. Go watch it on Netflix. Anything else to say about that one?
I don't believe so. I think it actually, I think it might release on the 30th. So it might be,
Oh, really? I thought it was
yeah,
the
it might
20th.
be Sunday that it comes out, I think.
All right. I will look that up uh, to make sure to see whether it's out yet
Yeah,
or not.
it comes out this weekend. I know that.
Yes, it does come out this weekend for sure. All right. All Quiet on the Western Front. It's available to play.
Okay. All right.
So it looks like it's out now. So it is available. So go watch it on Netflix. Now we'll move on to to more some news updates, and we get a bunch of stories that came out in the last week or two about DC and the reorganized DC studios, and so we're going to do a couple of stories from that, a couple of the headliners that grab you, and the first one is James Gunn is taking over creative direction as co-CEO of DC Studios. And so Warner Brothers has placed James Gunn in the leadership role. And basically, the new Warner Brothers Brain Trust has asked him to give creative direction to 10 years worth of movies. And this is something that DC has sorely needed, a steady creative direction. And so it will be interesting to see. The other co-CEO there is Peter Safran. Basically, James Gunn will handle the creative side. Peter Safran will handle the business side, is how this is going to work. But basically, these guys have been hired to bring the stability and the creative direction that DC has sorely lacked for a very long time. Rob, what do you make of James Gunn? What do you think of the hire of James Gunn to do this, and the plan for DC going forward?
So, for those who don't know, there was a lot of controversy around James Gunn with Marvel. He was actually let go.
Yes.
Marvel, and then there was like an outcry from the talent around him, and it looked like they might have been a little too quick to do that based on some rumors of things and allegations that didn't really pan out.
Mm-hmm.
So he's certainly well respected and traveled in the superhero genre. Guardians of the Galaxy, James Gunn.
Yes.
What I found really cool about this, reading some of the article and some news around it. How do you pronounce Marvel guy's last name? Do you know? Is it Feig or Phage or something?
I've never heard it pronounced. I've only seen it written.
I'm gonna go ahead and go with Feig because I don't know better. But he said that. So for those who don't know who I'm talking about, Kevin Feige is the basically Marvel version of what James Gunn is going to be for DC.
Yeah.
You'll see his name in like every single
Mm-hmm.
Marvel movie as a producer. He's kind of like the brains behind the operation, if you want to call it that. Along probably with Jon Favreau would be the other main one, I would say, when it comes to Marvel stuff. But he said, James Gunn said that one of the first things he did was get in touch with Kevin and talk to him about it, because he said that he doesn't view Marvel and DC as being in like a war against each other,
Mm-hmm.
that they're trying to build these universes to engage with an audience, and that there's enough of an audience for all of it.
Yeah.
And I really do believe if they're done well, there is enough of an audience for both of it. So, the biggest thing, obviously, which you had mentioned, is having some kind of cohesive direction.
Yeah.
Things, and he's certainly proven that he is capable of that task.
Yeah, and the question is, I view DC a lot like you do a long time struggling football team where they're constantly cycling through. Like they'll have a coach for a year or two, fire him. The next guy will come in, they'll fire them, then they'll fire the GM, and then they'll have a quarterback, he'll stink. They'll hire another quarterback, he'll stink, and you just get into this repetitive cycle where it's just constantly churning over new people and new people and new people, and it never feels like you get anything going. That's really what DC has felt like. This right here is an opportunity for them to correct it, but they're going to have to stick the course. They're going to have to stay the course and let this vision play out for good or for bad. They're going to have to let it play out. Otherwise, they're just going to get stuck in this repeating cycle of having to relaunch and rehash and refigure everything out. I like when they were talking about superhero tone management. I'll link to the article in the show notes. But they were saying one of the things that has to happen is tone management with your superhero movies, and they even reference the fact that Marvel has been struggling with this in Phase 4. And so they really like the fact that Gunn seems to be an excellent person at managing exactly that, of getting the tone right, especially when it comes to humor. I mean, Guardians of the Galaxy is the perfect franchise where you can talk about that. The humor was balanced perfectly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, I think overall, I just think they needed to go this direction. And we can talk about in a later story, I'll come back to one of the ways I think it might go wrong. If it goes wrong, how it will go wrong. And we'll come back to that in the third story here. But you got anything else on James Gunn?
No.
Okay. The next up is the announcement. And if you did see Black Adam, you will have seen a slight preview of this. But Henry Cavill announced his return as Superman. Henry Cavill will be back. That was not a guarantee up until very recently, but he officially announced within the last week that he's back as Superman. And he made a mid-credit cameo in Black Adam, apparently. And he says there's a lot more in the works when it comes to Superman. There's a Superman sequel that's being developed, and so apparently Dwayne Johnson's really been playing up the possibility of Black Adam versus Superman. I immediately get bad Batman versus Superman flashbacks, but who knows? We'll see. But I like Henry Cavill as Superman. Any of the qualms I have had with the Superman character that he has played, it has always been about writing and direction and not about performance. I do think he is quite good at playing this role, and it fits him pretty perfectly. What are your thoughts on Cavill?
Yeah, I think that for any criticism we can have of the DC universe involving Superman, I don't think there's any criticism for, like you said, how Henry Cavill has played the character. And I think from the very first time we saw his character, I still remember the IMAX trailer for the first 10 movie with him in it, and it just felt like I remember watching this being like, that's what Superman looks like.
Mm-hmm.
And I think he has definitely filled those shoes.
Yeah, I remember seeing him in Immortals, which came out shortly after it was announced that he was going to be the Superman. And I'm like, hey, this is a great movie to see. Does Henry Cavill have enough to carry this role? And after seeing him in Immortals, I was easily convinced that, hey, he can do it. And I don't think that has changed in that sense. And even though he's been in that role technically quite a while, it doesn't appear like he's really aged heavily to the point where he can't still play it and still look reasonably. I mean, that's one thing with Superman. It's like James Bond is allowed to age. Superman not quite as much. So I think he still fits from that standpoint as well. So we're gonna have Henry Cavill back as Superman. And our last DC update, this is really not a surprise, but the next Joker movie, Folie à Deux, will not be part of the larger DC universe that James Gunn is creating. This one is going to remain outside. Not a surprise because the first one was intentionally not inside anything that DC was doing. I think that's one of my main criticisms of it is that it wasn't. But this one will also not be. And this one's going to come out in 2024, starring, of course, Joaquin Phoenix reprising his role as Joker, as well as Lady Gaga in this one. Reportedly, it's going to be kind of a musical, which is, I don't know what to think about that. But it's not going to be part of the larger DC universe. What do you make of that possibility, and also the idea that they're not entirely sure if a Batman sequel written by Matt Reeves would also not be part of this DC? They're not 100% sure yet on that front. What do you make of the Joker first, and then
the Joker? I think it was expected this would be the case.
yeah,
So it's not very surprising. Um, I like the tone in the universe of Joker, so I'm wondering if having a second movie in it will give it a little more weight or a little more substance
mm-hmm.
as a thing. Um, as far as Batman goes, I could see it going either way. The Batman, being a part or not being a part. I guess it really depends on how much of that humor element slash snarky element like James Gunn brings into this vision he has for DC, because the Batman was definitely not that kind of movie.
Yeah.
So does it fit tonally? And that's the big, like one of the big talking points in making this decision was developing by tone.
Yeah.
Around the characters. So I could see it being a bridge too far for them to bring that in. I mean, I don't necessarily think he should be responsible or required to do that because it's not his thing.
Yeah.
And it's more the fault of DC for not figuring out what they were doing.
Yeah.
For so long that they have this issue now.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really interesting because they already have Matt Reeves signed up to do the new Batman movie, so obviously that's not going to come under Gunn. But I think this is the potential of where this could go wrong. This is what I was talking about. The idea that how can this go wrong? This can go wrong if they end up with too many side projects that are not under the actual framework. Like say Joker Folie à Deux does really well and they want to create another movie. So now you've got this ongoing series with the Joker that isn't involved in this. If the Batman still does well, like how do you integrate, like if Matt Reeves goes down in his vision with a second movie, now you've got two movies with a similar tone and feel that might be a different direction than where James Gunn is going. So now what do you do with Batman? Can you bring him in, or does this still have to be out on the side? So you could, in theory, end up with multiple large character side series going on that are outside of what James Gunn is trying to create, or they have to shoehorn something in a way that obviously doesn't fit super well. And I think that's where it could potentially go bad, especially with the fact that Reeves hasn't even turned in a script for the new Batman movie. I would be, if it were me, I'd be looking to get that under James Gunn as quickly as possible, and tell Matt Reeves he's got to work with James Gunn on this. It doesn't look like that's where it's at the moment, but that would certainly be a take that I would be looking to do, because the more you can get under the same umbrella as soon as possible, the more you should do it. But the fact that DC has been so fractured and terrible is why it's going to be hard to do that initially. And I think that's where it could go wrong, is that it's just too fractured to really bring under one roof quickly enough. Anything else on that?
I think we're both in agreement on pretty much everything there.
Yeah,
There's a little I think there's reason for optimism, but obviously cautious optimism,
for sure.
the word. So
Yeah. All right, so let's move on to our discussion. And tonight we talk about least appreciated aspects of movies. And this is basically things that if you just go and you're just watching a movie, the average moviegoer, we go into the theaters, we sit down, we watch the movie, we come out, we decide whether we liked it or we didn't like it. Maybe we have reasons why, maybe we don't. Um, but we kind of leave it at that. But there's so many nitty gritty or details or things over here that affect whether a movie is good, whether a movie is bad, whether we like it, don't like it, that oftentimes get overlooked unless we specifically pay attention to them. So I thought we'd talk a little bit about that aspect of movies. And so Rob and I will go back and forth on some of the least appreciated aspects of movies that maybe you should think about paying more attention to. So Rob, I'll let you go first. What's an underappreciated aspect of movies?
so the thing that immediately jumped to my mind, as far as something that some people might not notice right away, or maybe they do notice, but they don't really know how to frame what they've seen in conversation, would be how a movie chooses its color palette and what it means
Mm-hmm.
in telling the story.
Yeah.
If you want to get really basic and give an example that people can really relate to, it would be something like The Matrix.
Mm-hmm.
Although The Matrix is actually not as green as you think it was
Yeah, we did a story
originally.
on that a while back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that is definitely one, because I think almost anyone who has seen The Matrix, if you ask them what color would you associate with the movie The Matrix, they would say green.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Another one that I think of is Unbreakable,
Yeah.
and the color purple and the use of the color purple in that movie and what it symbolizes. It's not just there
Mm-hmm.
because it's there for a reason.
Yeah.
And then you can even go down to a more macro level and look at, and I've seen several of these online, of where people will post like a gradient of the entire movie from start to finish with just the different colors that are used in the scenes. And then you can see this like overall picture of these are the like warmths and depths of the colors that they
Mm-hmm.
used in this movie. And it really can tell part of the story,
Yeah.
um, based on what kind of color you use. Another one that I jumps to mind immediately as I'm thinking about this, the Book of Eli.
Mm.
So like tan, brown, and black. That's pretty much the only color you have in the movie, but there's a reason for it. I think sometimes people see a movie and they're like, "Oh, it's weird that they're doing this,
Yeah.
shooting it this way." But there's usually a reason for why the color palette is chosen,
Mm-hmm.
um, what colors they highlight and what colors they minimize. Obviously, black and white is its own, completely own thing.
Yeah.
That using light and shadow,
Mm-hmm.
but that's something that I pay attention to, and I think some people might not necessarily think about that when they go to see a movie for the first time.
Yeah, because and this was on my list too, but color palette really it helps determine your mood, how you're feeling about that scene. It helps to set what you're supposed to be feeling and and how you're supposed to be reacting. The two that kind of came to mind for me was 300 with the really heavy duty sepia over top of everything. It had a really stylized feel, which was designed to kind of create that comic book, which is this 300 was originally a graphic novel. So to kind of create that kind of look and make it more stylized. And the other one was Mad Max Fury Road.
Mm.
That had like the saturation on the colors turned way up. So everything just popped. All the colors popped in a way that you don't see a lot in movies. And it really, because the colors were heavily orange, in the orange tone family, it created a sense of danger, a sense of excitement, a sense of action that you would see in that. So it really, color palette does make a big difference. One for me, and I thought of this just through my work on Gladiator, is costume design. Costume design is highly underrated, because it really is, especially if you're dealing with a period piece movie, how effective the costuming is really, really makes a difference into the believability of the movie. Like,
Mm-hmm.
are you in this time frame? Does this look and feel like the time frame you're supposed to be in? Um, and the same thing with futuristic movies, or just your average movie. Like, what colors do they put the characters in? How do they have them dressed? How they're dressed says a lot about them. I think about The Dark Knight, how they make a special point of making the fact that the Joker's clothes tell nothing about him.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he has custom clothes with no labels. That says something about his character, how he dresses, what he chooses to wear. Those type of things all affect how a character is perceived, and makes a huge difference. And all of that is decisions made by the costume designer, in conjunction with like director and creative director as to what they're going for. But costume design is a very underrated aspect of movies.
And yeah, it calls for a lot of creativity from the people who are involved in the process, because you think about a movie like, or movie series like Pirates of the Caribbean,
Mm-hmm.
dress them like pirates. But you have to find a way to dress them like pirates in a way that each of the main characters in that series are going to have their own look,
Yeah.
but it's still going to be coherent within the story you're telling.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's in art, really, that is not paid a lot of attention to.
Or even like the weight that was placed on like the costume designer in the Lord of the Rings series, because there's so many details about these characters, and everyone's waiting to see what are they going to look like in real life. And you've seen it when it hasn't gone well in other movies, where the look isn't quite right, or people don't like the look of the character, how they don't feel like it's accurate, how it makes a big difference. And so getting the look right of a character that's well known, or a character that is from a book that is well liked, is not as easy as you would think.
Yeah, something that pops to my mind when you say that is like Elizabeth Salander from
Mm,
the
yeah.
Girl Dragon Tattoo,
Yeah.
because in the books you have this very vivid picture of who this person is.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like it's makeup, it's costume, it's all these things that
Yeah.
have to come together for that to be realized on screen, and in an effective way that people will relate to.
Yeah. What else you got?
Um, Obviously, I'm a huge music person, so I think of
Mm,
like the cues.
yeah.
Not necessarily like the big epic soaring soundtrack numbers, but like if they bring a piece of a song back, or if there's like violin sting in the background of a scene coming up,
Mm-hmm.
obviously a lot. Um, and suspenseful movies use it. I was just watching a horror movie last night, and found the musical choices interesting. I'm not sure if I love them or not. We'll get to that movie in the watch list section. It's a classic one. Um, but yeah, I'm always fascinated by, when does a movie use music? When does it choose to be silent? And music is often used, I would say, more than, maybe even more than visuals. Music is used to make you feel the emotion that the people making the movie want you to feel,
Yeah.
because there's a lot that music can do without having any words, um, in conjunction with the visual sequence going on, that can make you feel a certain way.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And the the key is when to be subtle and when to stand out. Um, Sometimes in a movie, you want the soundtrack to kind of, and the musical cues to kind of fade into the background, where you're not noticing them. You're just kind of, it's kind of leading you along without being overt. And there's sometimes where you want it to be in your face, and you want it to show you, um, I'm thinking of Inception, for example, about how so much rested on the ability of the music to handle what was happening, and you wanted it to be more forefront than that.
Mm-hmm. And
And
that seems to be kind of
yeah,
that's a hallmark of Christopher Nolan in general, because
for sure.
Interstellar and it are very much the same.
Yeah, yeah. Hmm. And even like in Inception, the use of the French song as a recurring musical cue throughout the movie, like that idea of bringing it back and repeating it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I'll give you one more here. How about framing?
Mm.
Framing is something that often we don't pay attention to. And framing is how you set up a shot with the camera. What is in the field of vision for the camera? This is often an underrated aspect. If you're doing a character, where is the character placed in the screen? This is obviously most noted when you have very highly visual directors. Um, I was thinking, and now I'm blanking out. Who am I talking about? You know who I'm talking about. Centered symmetry, and I'm blanking out on his name.
Wes Anderson.
Wes Anderson, thank you. It was not coming to me for some unknown reason. Wes Anderson is known for this because his framing is very, very symmetrical, and so everything looks very different than it does in any other film. But things like when you're doing a dialogue scene, where are the characters? Are they off to the left side? Are they off to the right side? What is the director trying to draw your attention onto? And a lot of that is done with framing. Is the shot wide and you're seeing the person's whole body? Is the shot from what angle is it being shot at? All of those things are ways the director is trying to show you something and trying to tell you something. I think too, one of the um, ways this works is like if you have a dual shot where you have two people in the same frame, maybe one's behind the other, and you see a shift in perspective where one person's kind of faded in the background while the other person's talking, and then the camera focus shifts back and forth. That's all set up through framing. And when you do it differently, it makes the story tell things differently. And sometimes you can literally see the director is trying to move you to a specific thing by how he frames a shot. There's several moments of that in like Blade Runner 2049, where the director, because of how he's framing a shot, is literally trying to tell you something.
Yeah, framing is also going to tell you how big or small the
Yes.
world movie is, and that's something that can go really wrong in a movie if you're trying to make a big epic movie. Um, there are some movies that feel like they're TV shows, and I think that a lot of the reason behind that is how it was framed. Um, what do you actually see in the background? What kind of set design is there? Is there like there's a different feel to a well-made movie. Like
Yeah.
it feels big. And the one of the fascinating things now is that with some of these shows that are coming out, like Showtime shows, HBO shows,
Mm-hmm.
Disney shows, some of the TV shows are starting to feel like movies.
Yeah. And that's a lot. There's a lot of framing involved in that.
Yeah, because obviously you're not operating under the same kind of budget as you are with a major blockbuster movie, so you've got to do a lot of work to make that kind of feel come across on the screen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it makes such a difference. And you can tell on certain movies where it comes off. There was a joke that, the extended edition of Dune is going to be like just 15 beautifully crafted shots of ships taking off and landing. But that's all framing, like this big wide shot of this massive vehicle coming down. It becomes part of the outlook of the movie, a part of how you experience it. And so much of that has to do with and this is behind the scenes stuff. They have to, sometimes it's storyboarded, sometimes you get a sense of where the director wants to go. Another really great framer is M. Night Shyamalan. You were talking about Unbreakable. There's some really, really interesting framing in Unbreakable.
Yes, absolutely. Some of the framing actually leads to the whole belief of who this character is.
Mm-hmm.
It can bring you into a place where you start to believe something about the movie that you're watching.
Mm-hmm.
Is this is why, I mean, this is the whole reason for the podcast. This is why movies are so fascinating and exciting to both of us. I think is there's so many aspects of
Yeah.
movie making that go into a movie. It's not as black and white as is this good or bad.
Yeah.
There's just so much involved. It's the reason why I've been able to talk about it for like 150 hours at this point. Because there's always something different to see.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. There's always so many aspects involved. And so next time you watch a movie, pick one of these and focus on it. Pick color, start noticing color palette, or pick uh, your thoughts about how it was costumed, or how it was framed, and just pay attention to that. I think you'll have a very different experience when you watch the movie, and you'll see things that you didn't see, even in some of your favorite movies. You'll pick up on stuff that you didn't pick up on before.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so let's move on to our watch list. These are movies we've watched over the past week and what we thought about them. Rob, what'd you watch?
So I've been teasing it a couple times here, but I've been obviously going through a list that was made for me by my best friend of horror movies to watch during the month of October. And last night, for the very first time in my life, I watched Stanley Kubrick's movie, The Shining.
Okay, all right.
So I mentioned earlier that I found his musical choices, some of them very interesting in this movie because it's very high strings, very intense, a lot of very like overt, deliberate, emotional, like kind of trying to keep you on the edge of your seat or uncomfortable
Mm-hmm.
uh, musical sounds going on in this movie. It actually was very analogous to me to how a lot of 2001: A Space Odyssey felt. Also,
Mm-hmm.
his movie.
Yeah.
So obviously, there's something there with how he chooses to make movies. I've always been wondering what this movie would be like because I know Stephen King, who wrote the book, does not like this movie.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I can after having read the book and seen the movie now, I can understand where that comes from because there is a lot in the book that is not in the movie, and obviously that's going to be true about any big book that gets made into a movie. But in my opinion, there's a lot in the book that's useful to understanding the characters in the movie that is not in the movie. And
Mm-hmm.
I think where he had a lot of issue with it, like in the movie, Jack Nicholson's character kind of goes from like perfectly fine to crazy. Like there's not really a lot of development there or explanation of why, other than he's isolated, so he goes crazy. Whereas in the book, there's a whole bunch of specific events that happen that drive him to that place,
Mm-hmm.
and then things go haywire from there. But you talked about framing, and I think that Stanley Kubrick, as much as I might think he goes over the top sometimes, and I'm not necessarily like his biggest fan, I do think that this is obviously something he excels at.
Yeah.
Uh, he is able to make you become a part of the world in a way that keeps you engaged. The one scene I'm thinking of specifically in this aspect is when Danny, the little boy, is riding around on his tricycle, which is like a really famous scene. Even if you haven't seen The Shining, you've probably seen the kid riding around on a tricycle on the orange and red and black carpet. And the way he follows that, like you're basically riding with him, really sets the tone for being like in the kid's shoes and why what happens is so scary.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I've said before that I think there are a lot of bad horror movies and a lot of average horror movies and very few really good horror movies. And despite some of my qualms with um, some of choices made, I would say that The Shining is a classic for a reason. I do think it is one of the better horror movies I've seen. Um, so I was happy to be able to actually finally see it. Just a brief mention of a couple others I saw over the last week. I watched The Babadook, which came out in 2014.
Hmm.
I like that. It was a stylish, more updated, creepy story about a mom and her son and an imaginary monster who comes to live in their house.
Hmm.
Um, it's definitely, like I said, creepy is the right word for it. Um, let's see, what else did I watch this week? There was a lot. I'm watching something scary every day. Um, so I also watched Poltergeist, which I don't ever seen all the way through either. 1982, I believe, came out. That one was more of a campy kind of horror movie, although there were some kind of scary elements in it. It was rated PG, but bear in mind it was PG before PG-13 existed, so it's probably like a PG plus if you want to think about it that way.
Yeah.
But I will be releasing like an article with a list of all these movies that I watched over the month at the end of the month. So if you're interested in checking out some horror movies, I will have a list of that for you in the near future.
Yeah. Yeah. We look forward to that. For me, I watched 3 movies, the last one being a kinda, which I'll explain in a moment. So the first one I watched was True Lies. This is 1994, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Jamie Lee Curtis. And it's kind of an interesting take on the spy film genre. Because obviously Arnold Schwarzenegger is, spy by night, boring businessman by day. Like he basically lies to his family that he has a boring day job. But his marriage is not going well. His marriage to Jamie Lee Curtis is not going well. When she gets hit on by a guy who is pretending to be a spy and wants to take her on this adventure, and Arnold Schwarzenegger finds out about it, and then basically puts her on a pretend mission where she's supposed to basically go in and plant a bug on some like businessman somewhere, and it turns out like it's Arnold Schwarzenegger, and then they get caught up in the whole everything goes wrong, and all this type of stuff. But it's really interesting from the standpoint of it's a little bit of a twist on the spy film genre, but it's very, very 90s action. It's very, very 90s action. All of the requisite blowing stuff up. The not really that serious, not really attempting to make it that believable. All the stuff that was very characteristic of those of that genre of film was in there. Of course, Arnold himself was classic Arnold. But yeah, I mean, it's fun, entertaining. I also watched another movie from 1999, October Sky, just because I like it. It's just a really good movie. And it's about a boy from West Virginia in a coal mining town who decides he wants to build a rocket after getting to see Sputnik. And it's a battle between a father and a son. It's the battle for, how do you do something when everyone's making fun of you, and when you have no resources, and just the determination to accomplish something. And it's based on a true story, and so it's just a really, really good film. So my last one is I got to see Amsterdam in theaters. Kind of. I did something I've never done before. I had a window of time, which, I can go see a movie. And I miscalculated time.
Oh,
I miscalculated time. I thought I had enough time to watch this movie. And so I go to the theater. I'm sitting there in the movie. The movie is like 10 minutes in. And I look down at my watch. I'm like, wait a second. I did not calculate time right. This movie is going to be over a half hour after I have to be somewhere else. I'm sitting there in the theater like, now what do I do? Like, I've never done this before. I've never screwed up like the basics of time math. to the point where I had to literally leave a theater before a movie was done, not because I hated it, not because it was stupid or I'd seen it or there was some emergency, because I miscalculated time. So I saw 3/4 of Amsterdam. So I don't even know what I'm supposed to say about this movie because I don't know how it ended.
Yeah.
Um, all I know is like it was well, what I saw was well done, a little bit slow paced, but the characters were really interesting. And
So
um,
I've
yeah,
had a similar experience a couple times. Actually, Dune in IMAX being one of those times.
yeah.
Where I underestimate how tired I actually am, and I will go to a late movie. This has probably happened 3 times that I can think of, but I'll go to a late movie and like halfway through I'll be like, I'd honestly like I like this movie, but I'd honestly rather be asleep. And when it came to Dune, the main issue was that to get home was a 45-minute drive still, and I was already tired.
Yeah.
So I was like, yeah, I should probably go home, even though this looks awesome and I've loved it so far. I was thankful that HBO Max had it very soon, so I was able to watch it not soon after it came out. But um, I try and not go to like 11 o'clock showings now, unless it's like opening night or something I'm really excited about, and I know I'm going to be engaged the whole time.
Yeah.
Because it's definitely like couch mode because the way these recliners are in theaters now, you can get very comfortable. And I know that when I'm sitting on my couch sometimes watching movies, I like fall asleep. Uh, and so it can be that way in the theater too sometimes if I'm tired enough. And I'm often tired enough because of, life.
Life. Which is what happened to me because I just have not had good windows to be able to go see movies. So I was like so excited I was going to go get to see this. And yeah. So I don't know if and when I'll get to see the end of that movie.
Hopefully soon.
Hopefully soon, but who knows? All right. You got anything else, Rob?
I don't, other than make sure you watch the whole movie if you're going to watch a movie.
Yeah, try to do that. It goes better that way. Um, until next time, thank you for checking out the Film for Fans podcast. And make sure you check out filmforfans.com. Rob's article on horror movies will be out soon. My article on the revisiting of Gladiator will be out soon. And we have a bunch of other content on there. So check us out, filmforfans.com, and tell your friends about the podcast. Until next time, enjoy the movies.